Doggies fans, all things Bulldogs, NRL Media Watch Episode 4. A very, very important episode. Bear with me with this one. I'm going to talk about how the media are operating on both sides here. This just isn't an attack at News Corp. Not so much an attack at Channel 9 and the Herald either, but I'm going to show you how our club and why our club has brought Phil Gould into the organisation. The number one reason. Well, let's say the number two reason. Okay. I'm going to talk about why News Corp believe they do what they do and go about things the way they do. You're going to hear the whole story about Jackson Torpenay, Raymond Fatala Mariner. I'm going to give you as much of that story and that picture. These things that have been talked about aren't isolated incidents. They aren't purely based on the incidents that have happened. There's a lot more to it, and it's, and no one should be blaming the players in this situation, and we shouldn't really be blaming the club for how they're handling things and going about things. There's so much at risk and at play here. Now, one thing I can say is that with the results on the field at the moment, with what the club is actually doing behind the scenes, no matter what they're presenting on the front of the scene and the hype and the belief, which has been apparent to pretty much the entire rugby league world, the belief is gone since a certain time in the year. So I'm going to explain all that. So listen on, because I believe I make sense to me, and if it makes sense to me, hopefully it'll make sense to some of you. All right. And I think it's a good position to be in, to be able to say, oh, look, that makes sense. The whole thing, this isn't it. Hopefully we, if a life was lost out of this, it's disgusting and horrible. But if we can get away with people getting through this, and it's not as bad as it seems. All right. It's hard to sort of say that. There are mental issues at play here. And Jackson Torpenay is the person who was walked away 5 weeks ago. And I love Jackson Torpenay. I love what you've done for Canterbury, and I hope you do stay with the club. I hope everything's been able to be resolved and you're able to achieve your hopes and your dreams. And I'm going to talk about, from an outsider, about that this can't be an isolated incident, that there's a lot that's happened this year and a lot that you've seen happen over the last few years that's taken its toll on someone who is devoted and loves Canterbury as much as him, who has family, who has friends, who has a player manager, whose income depends on the success of Jackson and his legacy. It's all important. The way he carries himself for all to see. But there's no doubt there would be mental health issues about what he's seen and what's happened. But at the same time, I'm not going to blame the club. I'm not going to. You can't blame the club in this situation either. Could things be handled differently? There's always learning opportunities in hindsight. Always. When you make a choice and a decision. And we see it every single day with businesses. We see it with decisions get made which affect humans, whichever road they take. And sometimes it's for the greater good, sometimes it's not. And sometimes there is a culpable person that you can blame in it. But in this instance, I think that we need to understand that how the media is presenting themselves on both sides of this, and how the club's utilising the Channel 9 and the Herald, and the Sydney Morning Herald papers and their links there, and why Gus Gould, one of the main reasons Gus Gould was brought to the club. We're going to talk about perception of what Canterbury has been and why it justifies a lot of the actions, and why their timelines are so important as to what's happened, and explain a hell of a lot. And some are already put two and two together and got this worked out, but there's a whole bunch of people who have their biases on what they can see on the field and are just going to take the axe to Phil Gould and to Cameron Ciraldo. And whether you like him or not, or whether you agree with decisions he's made, and I don't agree with all of them, there's a lot I don't agree with. But what I can say is that on this issue, it should not be another tag on and utilised as a reason to destabilise the current rebuild. The current rebuild, this stuff has been necessary in order to keep this rebuild going. If we go to our 4th board in 8 years, right? Our 4th board in 8 years, and go to our 5th coach in the same period of time, and get rid of Gus Gould, it's going to set us back even further. At the very least, for another 2 years, if they continue to do what they're doing and bring in more successful people, there will be a better foundation if we do need to make that change come that time. But the board must know, and Gus would know, knowing the fan base, seeing the sentiments on social media, they would be getting all of that information as to the feelings on social media and how it's validated by the media. They know that they can't continue to say, be patient, trust the process, and stick strong when players have got their heads down and aren't playing the season out and aren't playing for 80 minutes. Now, let's go back 12, 13 weeks ago. Let's go back to the start of the season. This is where it starts. Gus Gould, Averillo doesn't start at fullback. You go through all the players off contract, and any reasonable person, even if they hope the club isn't going in this direction, that they hope that the club is going to do everything it can to have a successful 2023. And believe me, I think Cameron Serrato believed that's what was going to happen, that he was going to turn water into wine and vice versa, depending on what you chosen flavour or drink. He had full belief, and the players at his disposal, I'm sure he felt that he would be able to get them up and get them competing for finals and working towards a system that he knows works. And Gus Gould knows his system works as well. In the background, though, there's a clean out happening again, which has been the case for a long time prior to Gus Gould getting here. Majority of the current crop had a win percentage of under 20%. It's not going to cut it. Everything that they had learned, their muscle memory, had resulted in losing. Okay? Circumstances aside, losses. So these people are going to clean out, and in that big broom that he was sweeping out the door, there were going to be some diamonds caught amongst it, which were going to be wrong choices in the long run. But overall, you're going to see a return on your investment. And Gus tries to keep things pretty simple on that end of things. He has his way of doing things, and he's going to do it. The mind's made up. These players, Averillo, Vaughan from the previous year, never stood a chance. And I'm sure there would have been, put it this way, I'm pretty sure Gus Gould would have had a chat with Wayne Bennett. And I'm pretty sure he would have had a chat with some people at Hull. And just like he had a chat with Tim Sheens to help out Brandon Wakeham and the like. I'm assuming. Like he would have had a chat with Justin Holbrook about Aaron Schopp. And had players walking into organisations feeling wanted and good about their careers and getting opportunities. Right? Jade Knockenball is going to walk out feeling better. Remember him playing that grand final and round against the Titans. It was like a grand final. That win that we celebrated. Burton kicking the field goal. Now, can you tell me if this news headline come out that a player was punished for being late and forced to wrestle 12 guys, and we just won that game against the Cowboys, would have changed things for you? If you don't like Gus Gould and Serrato now because of what you've seen, at that point when we're best start to our season in 7 years or something, or 6 years or 5 years, in contention still, and looking like we can beat some pretty decent sides, 2 top 4 sides in the Storm and the Cowboys, not bad. Still, there was some stuff that we didn't like, but there was periods where we looked pretty bloody good, scored some good tries, defended all right in periods, come back and the hype and Josh Reynolds running off the ground, cuddling, Matty Burton, and what scenes. Jacob Preston arrived at that club, surpassed a few of them. Mental issues already starting to happen, but things still looking good. And would you be blaming the club for, well, obviously these standards they've brought in are working. Sad for Tupane. The reality is, when Tupane has left the club, the New South Wales Cup team's fallen off a cliff and has the first grade side, even more so. And we've seen that in the starter games they've been in it and what they could do, but as soon as adversity comes, they fall apart. It explains a lot. You've also got the added is that a bunch of players who had seen the writing on the wall, knew that there was a bunch of players ahead of them, knew that they weren't going to be re-signed. Their managers, their families are all involved. They're starting to talk to each other. It's creating issues. It's not so much Serrato. He's copping the blame for it. But behind the scenes, the clean out was already well underway, and a lot of people, no matter how they really performed, never really stood a chance. And unless those kids were able to sit there and get us into an improbable position, which went out the door when all these injuries happened, you weren't going to see the results that we're after, and those players especially were watching their value and their future value drop. Okay? That's the mental anguish that they've got to deal with, and it's important. So we can sit here and be critical of them and saying, oh, they want to be unhappy about the training and all that. I think the training that's a secondary issue. Because when you start to feel that you're on the outer as an employee, you start to look at things to blame. These are all human elements. But when the media speaks about them, everyone comments as if they live those values every single day. I'm telling you, they don't. I'm out here right now watching people live their values every single day with the job that I do. And there's and me included in this, right? There has to be more benefit of doubt given to the players, but also to the club as well for doing what it's doing. Now, the history of Phil Gould and the media. Channel 9 and News Corp used to have given it to Canterbury. Stephen Folkes banned Wielder from coming to our training. Looked him in the eye, and I can tell you what, it actually forced Wielder into changing his stripes a little bit, which they say is impossible. But he's been a lot better human from what I can tell since then. But when he's got Phil Gould and Curry and the club sitting there telling him, giving him breaking news that's 100% accurate from what they're telling him, he becomes a trusted news source. A trusted news source is great for advertisers and brings more people to your masthead. If the news that you're giving is accurate, you're going to do better and do better for your job, right? So there's a good payoff for that. You give us good breaking stories, we'll make sure we work very closely with you in how stories are worded, especially when you come under fire from our competitor News Corp. And it's something our club had to do. And it's one of the main reasons that Phil Gould was brought to our organisation. and if Phil Gould leaves our organisation, now, look, is that necessarily a bad thing? Do we button down the hatches? Do we kick the media out? I can tell you that's all good in theory, but in today's world with social media, which is a lot different to what it was back then. Back then we could, in the start of 2000, not everyone had a mobile phone and was on the internet 24/7 with 5G. So you could turn off the television. You could not buy the newspaper and get yourself away from it. It was easily achieved, right? And you could take a siege mentality to everyone around you. You can't do that these days. And one of the major bits of feedback that our chairman and the board got, and that they promised to deliver on, was to reduce that perception. One of the main bits of feedback they got was the perception of Canterbury and Canterbury fans hate the way that they're being treated by the media and by the general public for incidents that have happened regarding the salary cap, regarding Coffs Harbour, regarding the ethnicity of an ethnic community around that our club is part of. You know, a beautiful community with beautiful people who are very disciplined, a lot of them. A lot of them are so disciplined, which is why they get so angry and passionate when they don't see discipline on the field for people getting paid lots of money. Now, I have lots of arguments with some of my ethnic friends. And they're not the only ones. There's discipline across all cultures, right? It's not exclusive. But when you got people who fast on Ramadan and then they travel over to, you know, every single year to make sure they uphold the values of their religion. And it's all about going without and selflessness and not being selfish. So when they see players on the field not showing them values, they get very fucking critical about it. And so they should, because that's what happens. Right? People don't understand this shit. And it's easier for people not to understand it. And that's the whole thing. But what I say is have some consideration for it. So you take these things or leave them. But with Gus Gould, he now ensures that we have a much better say. The club has more of a say on the information that comes out from one masthead. And they will actually, it's in their interest to defend. And they're trusted by their audience more because what they're getting is more accurate from the club. So now we go fast forward. Hope's been lost in the club. Josh Reynolds Day. Jackson Topine, the previous week, probably had his best game for Canterbury. Played pretty well. I think that was against Souths. I think it was against Souths. Maybe, maybe not. We then have to play the Broncos. And it might have been, I can't remember, it was Titans or Souths or something. But we had to play the Broncos at home at Belmore. Josh Reynolds is retiring. What better stage for a win and to keep our hopes alive in the season? Jackson Topine is exposed 3 or 4 times with his goal line defence in his first contact. Billy Walters, Braden Burns was there. There was other players around as well. It's not just him, but he would have felt it. He would have taken accountability and responsibility for it, and would have felt terrible. Would have fucked with his head when he's had to play left centre in 2 games and watch tries just go past him as he tried to defend out there. His New South Wales Cup team, when he's a part of it, best defensive record in the comp. He's filling in at first grade, they struggle. When he doesn't play, they struggle. When he does play, they do really, really well. Funny that. Now, should he get preferential treatment? So sometimes there's a bigger picture at hand, and sometimes they get it wrong. I'm not going to blame the club for it. The whole thing that they've said about Canterbury is we're too soft, we're not fit. We're bringing the fitness person. We bring in a sort of militant style consequences for when the perception is that somebody's late, even if they're not. Now, if you go into army training and go into boot camps and you're speaking with your lance corporal or your corporal, whoever's running, because I had a heap of mates, I'm from Wagga, I live near Kapooka, you know, and the training's not as harsh as it was. They've had to adapt. Because it's broken, people, don't get me wrong. And you can't break people the same way anymore. Abuse is abuse. But at the end of the day, if they sat there and told you that you were late and you had to deal with the consequence. If you answered back, the consequence would be worse. And the result is discipline and following orders and getting muscle memory into doing what's required to make sure that you win. Because in war and on the ground, if you lose, people die. And that is why, and in rugby league, if you lose, your club, there's just repercussions. And it's a man's sport, played tougher, with more fatigue in it at the moment. Although they're getting penalised more for foul play and all this sort of stuff. Things are touched their head and there's so much more they've got to worry about in the way they tackle and go about things. It all plays on their head, right? But come on. The Cowboys, every year they talk about clubs going on boot camps and where they can't take their mobile phones and where they do what they're told. And when they're winning, does anyone care about the consequences these people face? Now, when News Corp, so let's have a look. So this has happened 5 weeks ago. Then last week, the Herald reports that 8 players have said dissension. And I've explained all that. People are off contract, see the writing on the wall. They're losing money every time they step out there with the team. There's no adversity, no cohesion. It's been a tough year. They had belief. The belief's gone. It's affected them and it's affected the fan base and everyone's sad again. Like as if we're in the worst position we've ever been, which is not the case. We're just turning around. After 10 rounds last year, we're in the worst round worst we'd ever been. Even though we were playing better than we had in the previous 2 seasons. They sacked the coach. Takes Potter a few weeks. Former club legend. We win 5 of our we win 5 of our last 14 games, and 5 of 11 with Avarillo at fullback. You can see why the fans' perception sways. Players in and out. Standards. But the perception was that all the media hates us. So we fix the Channel 9 side of things and then utilise them to our club's advantage. The club isn't going to survive without having the help of the media at the moment on Channel 9. So it's important, but at the same time, you need to understand that there is a little bit of, manipulation of it. So some things are wrong when they're wrong, but some things are definitely not wrong when they're being called out as being wrong by the opposition masthead in News Corp. Now, Jackson Topinane, that happens 5 weeks ago, we see New South Wales Cup falling off a cliff. The last 6 rounds especially. 1 draw and 5 massive losses. With it all to play for. Missing Topinane, a big part of that. Massive part of that. A whole bunch of players that are going to be leaving the club but are fighting on, trying to show good attitude. Players that are doing what the coach says and getting it, but maybe the perception is they're failing on the field, copping a lot of heat. And also starting to go, oh, I'm listening to this guy, but I'm copping all the blame for our losses. I was considered for a 3-year contract for $500,000. Now I'm lucky to get a 1-year extension for half of what I'm on. All this plays into people's minds, and you have to give them the benefit of the doubt of it. Now you can sit there and say, well, go and give us a response, give us a reaction, react to it. I'm sure there's a whole people when they went out there in the field felt that way. But when your psychology's fucked. Your application to what you got to do physically is fucked as well. I know if I look at a big job I've got to do, I psych myself up and I'm committed to the task, I can get a lot more done. If I start thinking about, this, that and the other, and what's the point? You can easily fall off the cliff and, every brick that you got to lift becomes twice as heavy. And that's what's happening at our club at the moment. News Corp talking about we need, Gordon Tallis talking about we need players to come to our club and help. Well, how many can we have? There's Willie Mason, Mark O'Mealy, Josh Jackson, James Graham, Steve Turner, Paul Langmack's back involved, Terry Lamb's there every single day. How many can you fit in? Tell me. Whole bunch of others constantly around the club. Sonny Bill Williams, Andrew Ryan, all on the payroll. It shows you though, if Gordon Tallis was purely invested in understanding all clubs and how things are going to commentate on it, same with Blocker, they'd be more accurate in providing headline-based commentary. and then on NRL 360, he talked a bit about it, and he mentioned Darren Britt. I don't know what Darren Britt's been doing. The Hughes brothers are still involved on a lesser level. You've got Peter Mortimer on the board, Joe Thomas, one of the toughest hookers we had. And he mentioned Barry Ward. Well, Barry Ward is the bloody part of our pathways. Luke Goodwin, there's a whole bunch of them. It's for some reason we don't have enough tough ex-players helping us out. They just go to these cliche answers without actually doing their fucking homework. And then I really loved, Braith was quite kind last night on NRL 360. And he's saying he believes Gus and Serrato will get it done. But then asked about, would it hurt not getting Tino or Huss? And then Braith sort of talked about like Gus should have got that done. Well, should he? He couldn't. Are these players going to risk the value of their incomes moving forward? And I don't think Huss wants a 10-year deal because he wants to be able to potentially go to $3 million a season in his mind. He's thinking about endless opportunities. He probably wants 2 and 3 years at a higher level and then gets to prove himself there and lift that up even further. He goes to Canterbury on more. It works out as less, potentially. It's a big risk. Now, for us, it's just a couple of final pieces to the puzzle. But when they play our team and open us up so easily and see these players are contracted for a few years, well, why do they want to come? So that's why Gus is going to do exactly what we saw with South Sydney when they rebuilt, with Newcastle after Bennett left him in a hole. It was a tough time for Wayne Bennett. I won't diminish from that. It didn't help, and it's not all his fault what happened, but he's got to be accountable to the fact that they had to be rebuilt after he left. Broncos had to be rebuilt after he left. The second time. And funnily, there was players in that organisation which has gone on to help destabilise other clubs. I've been very supportive of Tavita. He was one of the players who talked about training being too hard, apparently, at the Broncos. One of the reasons they got rid of people. They got rid of a heap of people. So look, the media on both sides, Canterbury have to have control of some of the media. Michelle Bishop in Channel 7. She's one that gets a lot of good mail and takes a good position on the club. She's also very good with players as well. But her headlines for SEN were she went off at the playing group for not lifting standards. Now that's all based on supporting the club that are giving her breaking information and news, which makes her a more trusted, reliable source. She's already engaging anyway, and makes people on that news station trust whatever she has to say, which is good for her advertisers. We've got Darcy McDonald, who used to be our cheerleader, who gets a little bit of information here and there, which helps with the job that she does, and makes her sound that she knows what she's talking about. I'm not saying she doesn't anyway. But having these links in the media are about building relationships and managing things and managing business. And they're not going to get it done by just saying, stick to the process, trust us, trust in Gus, stay on the train, stay on the bus. It's not going to work when the players aren't winning. So the clean out was always going to happen. There's going to be a lot less players that are with win records of under 20% in our organisation in 2024 and beyond. And we will see some better performances next year. We'll also see some bad ones, don't get it wrong. If we get injuries like we did, expect a lot more and expect a few more people to be out the door. And Gus will keep cleaning him out until we assemble players who can bring enough confidence into the club and into the team where they can start hiring some even better players to fill those holes, and then start plugging the replacement of contracts with the local talent. And that's the plan. And it's worked in other organisations, and it'll work at Canterbury. Newcastle right now, there's a lot of local juniors in that team that are now contributing at a very high level, especially in the forward pack. Full of locals that have been there from the start. And you had a player like Frizzell and Elliott gets in there and he's all effort, even though, he takes a lot of hits at the line. Plays with a lot of energy. Would have loved to have stayed at Canterbury, I'm sure. But, I've said a lot here. The mental health's important. Jackson Torpenay would have been absolutely distraught after what happened at the Broncos game. And then to be embarrassed the way he was. And that's what it's like. It's embarrassment. It's embarrassment in the militant thing. When you're already not feeling good, you're already struggling to see the writing on the wall. And I might be speaking out of turn here, but I could be completely wrong. It might have all been just that one incident. But honestly, I have coached people and had to deal with a lot of things in business and in sport at a very low level. Just, your local weekend crap with kids. It's not crap. It's fucking fun as, but you got to deal with it. And it's not easy. And you make a lot of mistakes. But at this highest level, this rookie coach is getting a baptism of fire. I don't think it's about him being too militant. I think it's a case of reality has hit for a lot of people, a lot of players. We as fans realised that it was a big trial, that the season wasn't really all going to be about us competing for finals, and especially when the injuries hit, it was all over, and that they've enacted, Order 66 or whatever it is, where they go and kill all the Jedis, or get rid of all the people who've been around the joint losing, essentially. And that's what's happening. And that's exactly what's happened. There's been others that have come along, like the likes of Pele, who's had Hull chasing them from about May. New Brown going to Newcastle. He gets injured, comes back, and Kyle Flanagan's now the utility in front of him. There's a lot of players out there fighting for their lives and for their families, and it's not just the club. We like to credit Gus Gould with making all the decisions. So we want to give him all the praise for things that happen and give him all the criticism for when things go wrong. And because of that, we'll do the same with Cameron Serrato, because he's Gus's boy. But it doesn't mean what you're feeling is true. Just because News Corp and Buzz Rothfield will validate those feelings doesn't mean it's true. And I just love how people grab every headline as if it's true and throw it onto their pylon. Some good people do this. I've done it myself. You'll always utilise stats to tell the story that you want to tell. And I can bring in a whole lot of stats to reinforce what I'm saying as well. But we're having a chat here. We need the media on our side in the current environment that we're in with social media and a 24-hour news cycle. It's just imperative. And if you don't have it, if you're getting screwed from both sides of it, it makes it almost impossible to get a rebuild off the ground. And to have clubs waving their dick around like the Broncos and South Sydney, having a crack at Phil Gould as well for doing his job and highlighting things that aren't fucking true, like comparing us with them when it comes to a rebuild, get over yourself. So yeah, think about if this news come from the Penrith Panthers, where they use these styles of tactics as well as consequences. Think about the boot camps that these teams go on and how they did nothing but tackle to the point where some of the players were crying. I've heard stories where people felt broken and then they make the top 4 that year. I don't think even Canterbury got to that level. I think it's a transition where it's going to get to that level and where people will get punished and made example of. Especially when they've been on the field and individual errors and individual things have cost them. At the same time, that brings me to the other thing of tall poppy syndrome. There's certain players that may not get made example of, and that's where dissension comes in. When your captain's out there and made multiple mistakes, is he being told to wrestle people over and over? Is he getting embarrassed? That's where it comes into it. And that is something that all teams have to manage. And whether you're first or last, that's something that has to be dealt with. The difference is that the leaders in other clubs at the moment aren't making those errors week after week and aren't faced with the burden of it. And to be honest, that has to be reviewed, because if Burton and Marnie are out there missing plenty of tackles, putting in as much effort as they can, but then losing their confidence with the decisions and choices that they're making, and with the outcomes of their missed tackles and all that sort of stuff, how do you think they feel going back to training and trying to lead the team and they're not the ones being made example of? And I would say they probably aren't. And that's a tough thing to balance too, because when you start penalising your captain, it doesn't look good. Your captains have to be beyond reproach, which is why it's always easy to pick one, especially in a struggling team. And teams that have been struggling that have picked multiple captains haven't really done that well. But sometimes when you're on a rebuild, you pick multiple people because you don't know you have no idea who's the best one, and you're trying to find out who that is. So for me, I'd be like, give Jacob Preston every single award this year and give him the captaincy for next year, because I reckon he'll be beyond reproach every single game, whether it's a training or on the field. I'd like to hear people's thoughts about that as well. I've talked for 40 minutes on this. Thanks for listening, everyone. It's very, very important in my head that we understand the media's how they play a part in this whole thing, why the players feel the way they do, why we don't have to blame the club, we don't have to blame Gus, we don't have to blame Cameron, that Mick Potter's still at our club, everyone. And believe me, he's one of the toughest coaches from what I've been told and heard from people with first-hand experience. And he can be very, very abrasive. So, when the perception is that Cameron Serrato hasn't dropped players and when he's been too soft and been too positive, well, we get some news reports that behind the scenes, it's not like that at all. And he's trying to toughen the place up. But believe me, it's not just him. And the other thing is, people are saying get rid of Chad Randall. Well, does anyone know what Chad Randall brings to the table? Why are we commenting on it? It's funny, we want to give praise to assistant coaches when teams do well. And a lot of the time we don't blame them when things go wrong. But if we don't know about an assistant coach, for example, like Chad Randall, wasn't a big player, and your team's doing well, who is he? Get rid of him. Andrew Webster at the Tigers when they weren't doing well. A lot of fans would be like, we need better assistant coaches as well. Who's this joker? You just don't know. So many comments get flapped around about things as fact. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed listening to me babble on. I have stuck with me here for this 41 minutes. The club is doing what it's got to do. It's making some mistakes along the way, sure. Players are also doing what they've got to do for their lives and their. Now, the easy solution is to suck it all up, go out there and represent yourself and play well. And I get that. But when you get to that point of the season when hope is lost, when you've had hope for so long, it's a lot different to a reset of, all right, we've got nothing to lose now, let's go for it and show everyone what we can do. Our season was pretty much the same as it's been for the last 4 or 5 years, except we had hope at the start and it's fallen away at the end. Whereas in recent seasons, we've gone on a run towards the second half of the season when it's all been over. And if you can't see that, well, that's the reality. I know it, and having all that hype and having that everything that made us believe stripped away from you makes it seem worse than it is. And our for and against is horrible. But hey, our attack has improved, and overall we have a worse differential because of our defence has gone backwards. All right, guys, thanks for listening in. I'll post this up, and interested to hear your feedback, and hopefully some more things to consider there with what's going on, and understand it's not just. It's a bit of a catch-22 at the moment, but things will get better. Thank you very much.